You join the channel here over on Subscribe. So I found this article that was just so ridiculous, as most of them articles on the Mary Sue are indeed ridiculous. So the science behind The Last of Us is terrifying fans by my favorite Rachel Leishman. Oh God, there's just a couple of these. There's like 3 of these chicks who can be relied on to write articles at the Mary Sue. When I see them, I get excited. So The Last of Us triggers soy people who think it's the next WuFlu. I guess I have to be somewhat careful on YouTube talking about that. If I once mentioned the scientific method in relation to that, and I got a strike on another channel. So this article from the Mary Sue, they seem way more concerned about the WuFlu than I ever was. I paid attention, like most people, for the first month, and then, you know, like most of us, we just kind of went back to normal. Like, it was that first month that people were really fired up and keeping their distances on dog walks and whatnot, and it's like just, it slowly kind of went back to normal, and there were always, like, people who were, you know, you were out walking the dogs, and you saw, like, everyone was back to normal, like, really quickly. And then there were some people who were, you know, walking in the middle of the street with, you know, their panties in front of their face type of thing. And, like, we're all just kind of looking at them out of the corner of our eye. And, or even now, occasionally I'll see people in their car with the panties in front of their face. I'm trying to avoid using that hot word. It's a little bit weird. Anyway, so I saw this thing last night. Someone gave me a HBO sign in and password. So this article from the Mary Sue, the weird thing is a lot of the soy people are still very concerned about the WuFlu. I assume by now that people had kind of lost their, most people, you know, I assume had lost their panic over it and moved on. And I don't know what, like, what I can say. I can say that it doesn't seem like a big deal because YouTube has rules about taking it super serial. Speaking of which, Al Gore is in the news again for some nonsense. Like, buy a house right at sea level and tell us about global warming. With the glaciers melt and the sea levels rise. Yeah, you have a mansion with a giant carbon footprint of like 10 homes because you heat it and cool it, and well, it's like a home office. It's a mansion that, you know, it's like the carbon footprint of like 50 people is tied up in one mansion, or Obama's got a house at sea level and they're telling us about global warming. I mean, you know, logically inconsistencies that a child could point out, but whatever. Anyway, I do take all whatever YouTube tells me to take super serial. I always trust these nameless, faceless puppet masters. I'm sure they're acting in our best interest. I take it super serial in theory, but just not in practice. Like, I've always carried the mask around in my pocket. I'm sure there's some shorts hanging out somewhere that still have masks in them, or panties in them. Kind of an awkward phrase, just in case, but I never remember to actually take it out and wear it. So The Last of Us doesn't bring anything new to the table. This isn't a good show. People just like the lead actor, Pedro Pascal or something. The guy was in Mando. He was in the very unfortunate Wonder Woman 84. Where they dyed his hair blonde so that you knew he was a bad guy, because it's okay to degrade, dehumanize, and direct all your hatred towards blonde people. So the rest of the story has been done 100 times over the past decade. I'm trying to remember when the zombie thing kicked off. I mean, it's like zombies and vampires never really, or werewolves, you know, they never really go away. There's a theory about them just kind of cycling through the culture. But the zombie thing came back, I don't know, like 20 years ago, but it came back in books. And then it came back into that movie that was made with Brad Pitt. But like, zombie movies were like, they never really went away. But there was a fictional boom, I think about 15 years ago, because I still have the books on my shelf. Some of these collections. It was a huge hit, and there was a lot of good stories that came out of that time period. And now it's mostly over, but it's like, you know, you can just keep cycling through zombies, werewolves, and vampires, just always finding new stories to tell. I mean, now they're kind of doing the Hogwarts ripoff with the Wednesday type of thing, which, you know, good for them. So the story's not good. It's just the actor Pascal, who's like, people like him probably because he's in the Mando, but I mean, he's wearing a mask in the Mando, so who knows? This isn't a good movie at all. It's just that everything is so bad that in relative comparison, people like it. It is a pretty sad state of affairs to see the modern stuff that people think is good. You don't have to accept crap just because that's all that's offered. The option is to refuse it. You know, maybe I'll go back and watch Wonder Woman 84 again now that I have the HBO sign in. That was such a shockingly bad bad movie. Like for 2.5 hours, a shockingly bad movie. It's like, hey, what happened to part 3 in the trilogy? Oh, we're just gonna put that one back on the shelf. There goes Patty Jenkins. The option is just to refuse it all, not and to go read a book or something, not to watch the best, the worst because of FOMO, fear of missing out, which is that is a very real cultural phenomenon. Though I'll say it's probably losing its strength because, say, 20 years ago when the stuff like Sex and the City was a huge hit, there was like a half dozen cultural phenomenons like that where everyone was on board with that kind of stuff. Like I always mentioned Dallas back in the, I don't know, the 80s. And then it's like it's kind of fading because there's so many different platforms, you know. There's probably like a dozen major platforms and then a dozen more minor platforms. You just, unless everybody has HBO, you're not all going to be on the same page, or Netflix or Amazon or a couple of the others like Tubi and Hulu and Disney, and I don't know how they're all tied in, but like you have people who like they have Amazon, or some people have Netflix, or some people have a couple. You get the idea, but it's like you're not just like people are in these separate cultural universes now, and it's kind of like I said before, it kind of rings alarm bells for me that people are not on this. You have a country of people living together, but they're not on the same cultural page. In fact, if anything, they're getting further and further away from each other. It's like you're just talking about dumb streaming sitcom shows. Yeah, but I still think it's important for people who are living together to at least be familiar with what common ideas are being circulated, and you're not seeing that anymore. Like you have people who are just in these separate little universes, and then you have some people who are like on Odyssey and Bit Chute watching that stuff all the time because there's like the mainstream stuff is just so boring. Anyway, everyone is watching something. It's like so that's an excuse to get you to watch it. But it's like, well, yeah, but is it any good? Because in my opinion, almost everything post 2020 is crap, including this show. And yes, it's woke. What did you expect? It's post 2020. Everything's going to be woke. There's a scene where a pox woman is in a meeting with two other pox women and some token guy. So it's, 3 out of 4. So how far down the Bolshevik brainwashing matrix do you have to be to just accept this scene without your brain registering it as an issue? You get a scene where people are making critical decisions, and in the show, 3 out of the 4 are pox women. I mean, is that organic? I know it's current year. Yikes, my guy. Touch grass, friendo. Bad take. Just yikes. But are we so brainwashed that we don't stop to wonder about the verisimilitude of that scene? It's like, oh, it's totally organic. Totally organic. Okay, all right. I mean, it's not. It's not. I know it's not. And the thing is, if I remember right, it's specifically, how dare you confuse people? It's 3 African women where statistically it's going to be Latin people in the future, in a future America, but they are wildly and weirdly underrepresented. Hollywood loves black and ignores Latin, Asian, and Europeans. At least they're underrepresented. And that scene, they're basically BLM and Antifa who are fighting against the man while they're simultaneously all fighting against these, fungus zombies. But even in the zompocalypse, you have a theme of violent, stupid, intolerant, fair-skinned cops who are mostly the bad guys, but the pox-wox women are leading the underground resistance, fighting the man who is more likely than not going to be blonde-haired and blonde-haired. Anyway, so that is season 1. It's cringe, and if you enjoyed it, you should feel ashamed. You're a bad person who is willing to settle for globalist cancer because you just don't want to turn off the soy slop. But the Mary Sue is concerned about the theme of global warming or global cooling or global sideways chicken little the sky is falling. They never had a physics or chemistry class in their life, but they believe the corrupt media and government about climatology. Yeah, it's been changing for 5 billion years. Good luck telling the Chinese and the Indians to stop polluting. They never. It's weird. They never bring that. No. We're just gonna the Paris Climate Accords. We're just gonna focus on Europeans, but it doesn't make sense. If you're gonna ignore China, then you don't have a foot to stand on if you're gonna ignore China and India. We're just gonna not have kids. So what happens there? I mean, you know what happens there. Anyway, so these mushrooms grow in some people's brains and they take them over, which is a great concept. I think I've seen that in science fiction books before. But the Mary Sue is concerned. Oh, you know what? I do have a book on my shelf where these guys, they go to an island and they get taken over by the fungus, and they have to go in the salt water to wash it off. Yeah, I literally do have the book on the shelf. But the Mary Sue is concerned about something to do with the WuFlu and this global warming fungus, and they don't want you having kids, but the third world should be supported in having them. You know, how exactly does that benefit the environment? The thing is, the third world already doesn't care about the environment at all. Like zero concern. I don't think it's Istophobic to say that because it's so very obviously true. Like you try to bring it up to non-European people and they look at you like you have two heads. If there's a problem, they kind of assume that the magical European will solve it, which is going to be an issue because they've been brainwashed into not having kids because of cultural Marxism over the past 70 years. So, you know, future doesn't look too bright in that regard. I hope I didn't trigger the algorithm on this. Anyway, like, comment, subscribe, join the subscribe star if you wish, and I will see you guys all next episode.